So today we're going to interview you. We want to hear what you have to say about the commission and the history and that. But to start off with, can you tell us where you were born, family, education, your career, personal, military career, why you joined the service? Just tell us a little bit about you. We'd like to know.
Okay. Well, I'm James S. Whitfield, but I go by Jim. I was born in Warrensburg, Missouri in 1926. Recently celebrated my 90th birthday, January 12th, but that's beside the point, really. I grew up here, of course, and my dad was in the dairy business at the time I grew up. Warrensburg was only around 5,000 people, and so I got to know everybody in town, and especially the World War I guys that I kind of grew up delivering milk to, and later when I was in high school, my dad shifted businesses to a restaurant, so I served them hamburgers in the process. But I had a normal growing up life in Warrensburg and as a young guy, and of course World War II broke out. I was a junior, I guess, in high school, and somewhere along the way I got interested in the Navy and graduated in 1943, and 2 weeks later I was sworn into the United States Navy. So I spent what back then the Navy called it a minority cruise type thing. If you enlisted at 17, the day you turned 21, you'd have 4 years credit towards retirement. And I really left home with intentions of staying 20 years, and along the way changed my mind, and Dad was ill, and so I decided to come home. But Navy was good to me, and I've always said I was hoping I was good to it. I enjoyed the Navy very much. I was on board the same ship 33 months, troop carrying ship. I was blessed with the fact that it was a troop carrying ship, so we did get the United States occasionally, and that was a break, because if you got assigned to the South Pacific, you were there till the war was over. No coming home. Back then the service was 7 days a week, and you just kept on moving forward. But it was an interesting life, and when I got home from service, I was already a member of the American Legion. A fellow named Al Rodenberg was a World War I guy and a service officer, and saw my dad one day and said that I ought to be in the Legion. So I guess that's how come I've been a continuous member for 71 years now. But basically it was the World War I guys that really got me interested in veterans activities, and proceeded to be active in the Legion, and ultimately, after I graduated from college, I returned here and went to which is now the University of Central Missouri. Attended college here, and only 1,600 students back then. Now I think there's 13,000 or something like that has grown, along with the Whitman Air Force Base being established here in World War II. And so the city's grown now to be almost 20,000 compared to when I grew up, it was 5,000. So after I graduated from college, I really haven't lived in Warrensburg since then. I've transited regularly because my mother lived here. She lived to be 101, almost 101 years old. Maintained her own apartment, by the way, until a few months before she passed away. But I do have a sister that still lives here, and my nephew, who I lean on pretty heavy. I really didn't get married till I was, I think, 31 years old, and we didn't have children, and so I lean on my nephew, who's pretty heavy, Scott Dunham, and I have one sister, and she still lives here, 22 months younger than I am, and so from that point on, I got extremely interested after I got out of college and was a member of the Legion Post doing things locally with World War I guys, and ended up working at national headquarters for 25 years. And then I worked in St. Louis with the farm and power equipment dealers for 20 years, and about that time, I guess, I lost my first wife by a sudden heart deal after 42 years, and I batched for about 4 and moved to Independence, and then met a nice lady, and we was married almost 10 years, and I lost her 3 years ago with cancer. So I've experienced various things in life, and total wise, I've been blessed with many opportunities, and traveled with national commanders of the American Legion to various parts of the world, and seen things that I probably never dreamed that I would be seeing when I grew up in Warrensburg, Missouri. Because biggest deal back then, of course, was back I guess early on, was coming out of the Depression period, and Dad was working 7 days a week, and I grew up kind of following him around. In a way, I thought I was helping, but I was probably in a way. But my biggest treat back then was in the summertime. We never took vacations. You just kept on working. But one weekend a year in the summer, we'd get on the train and go to St. Louis to see a weekend of Cardinal baseball in Old Sportsman's Park. And you get down there on the train and got on a streetcar, and you even had to change streetcars to get to the ballpark. But that was a big treat back then, was go to St. Louis. So I've been a Cardinal fan ever since. Now I live in Kansas City, and they say, "Why aren't you support the Royals?" And I said, "Well, I just grew up a Cardinal fan, period. It's that simple." So I don't know, that's just kind of rambling about myself, and had great opportunities and great experiences, and so.
Glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Commission history, your time on the Veterans Advisory Board, what you know about, did the commission used to be under the Department of Social Services?
Yeah.
And then when we became NBC then, so.
Yeah. Well, the commission, certain things led up to the formation of the commission itself. I came on the old Missouri Veterans Advisory Board in March of 1985, and back then it was just prior to that. It had been under the Division of Social Services, I think that's which it was, and of course veterans activities didn't belong there, at all, and it had been changed somewhere in the early '80s to the Veterans. I think they called it the Missouri Veterans Bureau, I think, and as far as I was concerned, it was lost someplace in the catacombs of government. And the old advisory board was actually under the Adjutant General, and it was made up of 9 members, and it was provided that there would be 2 from the 3 major veterans organizations. The Legion, the VFW, and the DAV, and the other 3 members would be staggered among the other veterans organizations, such as the Military Order of Purple Heart and various other things. They get 1 member in a rotating type basis. We met quarterly, and it was kind of being reorganized, I guess, when I was appointed to it, along with 3 or 4 other members, and one of them was Francis St. John, who was a past state commander of the VFW. So we elected him chairman, and I was elected vice chair and legislative chairman, and we didn't have a legislative program going, period, at that time. And one day, I guess, after a year or two, Francis, we looked at each other and said, "What are we advising?" You know, we met quarterly and got a report and went home, and that was it. So we got the idea that we needed a Department of Veterans Affairs. Well, this happened to be probably 87, 88. And of course, prior to that, the Veterans Home at St. James is called, I think, the Federal Soldiers Home back then. It had just recently been, it was a separate board completely at one time. The St. James was a completely separate operation, and the Veterans was, what, in the early 30s. We know that it was created as a state service officer. Well, all that dates clear back to that period of time. It was a state service officer, and then they got St. James, and then we got a Veterans Home. Was able to get space in St. J or in Mount Vernon, which is the old TB hospital, and back then it was okay, but it was soon antiquated property. But so some of that happened before the Veterans Advisory Board, leading up to that phase, and then they had created the Veterans Advisory. It was called what? Missouri Veterans something. Anyway, under the Adjutant General. And of course, at that point, we had only St. James. We had they transferred, that became the service officer aspect. And as I recall, right after World War II, it was such that most counties had a county service officer under the Veterans Committee, or whatever it was called back then. I don't recall exactly what it was called. So that was part of the early history, was the single service officer, leading into then finally World War II, expanding that service officer program, and that's all it was. It was there for a while, and then they brought on Mount Vernon and transferred St. James to create a couple of veterans homes, and the staffing was minimal because we only had the two homes, and the service officer program then kind of faded away. So when I went on advisory board in '85, we probably only had about 18 or 19 service officers, and the central office was kind of lost. It was up on Leslie Avenue somewhere, and we had to go around the building and in the back, and it was not accessible. And had a director, a deputy director, a service officer, probably, and two other people. Probably not more than 6 or 8 in the whole office, with Mount Vernon, St. James, and they had just broke ground for Mexico, and it was dedicated probably about 86 or 87, shortly after I went on the advisory board. So that gave us three homes, and of course Mount Vernon and St. James weren't in the best of condition, but so that's basically what we had when we decided that we needed to improve the veterans' activities in the state. We really wasn't providing very much for veterans at that point in time, and so we went to the speaker, because we knew it had to be legislation to form it, and so the speaker advised us that Department of Veterans Affairs department wouldn't work because it was to take a constitutional amendment. There was already 16 departments, and they were all filled, and And he was the one that suggested it. So well, we'll do next best, and that'd be a commission. So that's what we decided on would be a commission, and the process it would be a standalone type commission. It would be appointed. The members would be appointed by the governor, subject to the consent of the Senate, but on recommendations of veterans groups to the governor. The bill got written and really passed in the first session of that particular legislative session in 89, and it was kind of unheard of for a bill of that importance to pass in one session. They normally go anywhere from 2 to 4 years, I found out, where you got to really something passed. But this happened to pass one deal because the speaker was in favor of it, and I remember walking down the halls and some of the representatives say, "Yes, we're for 850." That was the House bill number. It was 850 in that session. And an interesting sidelight would be that in the process, the House at that time was heavy Democrat. Of course, the Speaker was Democrat, and the governor was Republican, and he'd already announced that he was opposed to any expansion of government. Well, this was expansion of government. The commission, Speaker looks, I don't know whether it was me or a couple of us, and said, "What's the governor's position?" Well, we didn't have any idea because this was the first time we talked about it was to the Speaker, because we knew it had to be a legislative item and somewhat green in government, and I guess I still am. But I said, "Well, Mr. Speaker, I really don't know, but I'll find out." So I was fortunate to know a person that knew the governor, because I didn't know the governor, I just knew his name, never met him. And so I called my friend and I said, "I need some help. I need to find out what the governor's position is." Well, the governor's position was Ashcroft, Governor Ashcroft. And so he made the contact and he said, "Well, in fact, I'm having breakfast with the governor next week." And I said, "Well, that's a break." And the governor merely said, "I'm opposed to expansion of government. I'll not do anything for the bill, or I'll not do anything against the bill. If it reaches my desk, I'll sign it." Well, that's all we need to know. So the Veterans Commission was then created, and in the process, well, how many's going to be on the commission and the organization of it? And we threw around some numbers like 5, 7, 9, and the Speaker reminded us that there should always be an odd number and shouldn't be too many. Said you should. He also, being the politician he was, Bob Griffin from Cameron, he said, "You need to elect your own chairman." So the governor doesn't need to appoint that person. So he helped us out there. Now we green. We just wanted to get veterans activities going in the state, which we didn't have very much of at the time. And so it was interesting to watch that bill move. And as I said, it went through in one session, and the governor actually signed it during the State Legion Convention in July of '89, and it would be effective the end of August. Their 90-day wait period, or whatever it is, it's part of a bill. And so the commission itself was then appointed on November 2nd of '89, and various veterans groups recommended people, and the Legion recommended me, and the director of public relations, director of public, what is it? What are we under? The Department of
Public safety?
Public safety. I was determined to where we fit in. So we don't need to be social services. We're veterans groups. And the adjutant general was various other, and the highway patrol and so forth was under public safety. So that it was logical that we would fit there. And of course, determined that we would be a standalone commission, but in the process we had to go through a department for budget purposes mainly, and some other administrative type details. So, as I recall, there's somewhere around 30 veterans recommended, and the interview process was held in one of the offices next to the governor, and actually. The Legion promoted me to be on the commission, which, I didn't aspire to it, didn't think anything about it other than I wanted some movement made, and worked towards that. And so I ended up getting one of the 2 4-year appointments, and then ultimately, after a couple of meetings, was elected chairman, and served at the first 4 years of the commission as chairman, and then continued for almost 10 years, and then resigned to move to independence and to take on military fuel honors program operation at that time. So, but that whole experience of 10 years was great, and walking the halls of the legislature and trying to get things accomplished for veterans, and then the process of just. We was actually appointed in November, and a little later on, we knew we had to change office space as well. Bill Haynes was the deputy, and he went to work through the Office of Administration and others to improve our office, to make it more accessible, and that's when we finally moved over on, was that Stadium Drive? Or before we moved to our present office space, so that improved our image, and what we was trying to accomplish was accessible, and started doing things in the legislature. Sidelight was I guess it was probably about 89, 87. Shortly after we moving towards the commission, Senator Matheson of Sedalia had just been elected President Pro Tem of the Senate, and he reorganized the committees. And I saw him in the hall, and I just knew who he was. And we got really very well acquainted later on. But I said, Senator, I noticed that in your reorganization, which I favor, I mean, you reorganize things to make it streamlined, but I noticed that the word veteran is not mentioned in any of your committees. He said, well, we weren't getting any legislation, and veterans weren't appearing before us, so I just eliminated it. And we visited a couple of minutes, and he said, well, everything's reorganized right now, and I'm not going to make any changes. But if everything goes well, I'll probably be reelected in 2 years, and you remind me. And so I did, and he put the word veterans back in, so we've had the word veterans in the Senate bill, Senate committee ever since. So, those little things happen to you along the way. And
so throughout, you developed special relationships with some elected officials. Who have those elected officials been that's helped the commission?
Well, legislative work is not done over in one day. You got to create relations with the leadership, whichever party it is. And sidelight there was that they could never figure out what party I belonged to, because I was never for issues dealing with either party. And I reminded them, I said, my only issue is for the benefit of the veteran. And that's the way I operate. I was there for the veteran, period. So I had good relationships with some special people on both sides of the aisle. One of them happened to be Chuck Wooten, who's on the commission now. He always joked about every time he turned around, I was at his doorstep. But that wasn't quite true. But Senator Matthews was a great help. You learn if you're there every day, which I normally went in on a Monday, because the House committee met Monday night, and the Senate committee always met on Wednesday at that time. And so after meeting on Wednesday, there wasn't much going on when I'd head home and come back the next week. But Senator Madison was one. Senator Quick was a majority floor leader for a number of years. And then later on, Senator DePasco. A fellow by the name of Montgomery was the House chairman when I first started. And right next to him was Steve Gaugh's office. So I got to know him, not realizing somewhere in the future you got to know them all, be friendly with all of them, because you never know where they're going to land up. Well, later on, Steve Gaugh ended up being speaker. So there was back in, I'm rambling some, I guess, but those were some of the leadership and others that were helpful, because you couldn't spend time with all of them. Right, close to 200 there altogether.
I'd like to know the history of the startup, getting Higginsville Cemetery, the choice, and history about the Higginsville Cemetery.
Cemetery system, the Higginsville Cemetery, it was about the time the commission got started. There was an individual in Higginsville that left, I think, $2,500 or $25,000. I'm not sure which the figure was. With the idea that it would maybe be a cemetery in Higginsville. Well, it went through appropriations, and that's before we really got in the cemetery business, actually. They were just rumbling wanted one in Higginsville. And there was some kind of appropriation, but it turned out that the money wasn't properly earmarked and it had already been spent, so there was no money available, and that upset Higginsville. And I guess about that time the commission was organized, and Higginsville drew me into the picture real quick since I was the chairman. And so we talked about it, and I kept saying, well, you know, we don't have cemeteries yet, period. And I know in July, in this box of papers I've talked about, in July of 1990, which was commission wasn't a year old yet, and we'd already done work about increasing the homes. And there was a study made, the state legislature authorized a study in maybe the late 70s about veterans' needs, but it was kind of a study that went on the shelf, and it was recommending 6 veterans' homes. Did not mention cemeteries at all. So in that July, I ended up drafting paper for the commission's consideration. And by that time, we'd drawn circles, 50-mile radius and 60-mile radius, just kind of of trying to keep it out of the political arena, even though you're in that arena, whether you want to be or not, of establishing homes in a demographic process, so that 50, 60 miles people could come visit, type thing, and, and so that's how come we arrived at the various locations. We ended up with the 7 veterans homes where the commission originally wanted them, which is kind of unusual too when you're playing in a political arena like we were. And at that time, in this paper, I said something to the effect that we need to establish a Missouri state veteran cemetery system, and without any location. So, and a couple of the commissioners looked at me like I was crazy talking about a cemetery, and we're still trying to build homes. But I was dealing with Higginsville, and then along the way, various things happened, and we didn't have the land yet either. It was just conversation. I made several trips to Higginsville to meet with groups about it, and I guess partly stalling them because we were trying to build homes. We didn't have money for everything. And then along the way, Springfield National filled up, was closed, so that whole southwest area was accustomed to a veteran cemetery. Well, they wanted a veteran cemetery, and so we came up then with the land we now have. The electrical company was disposing of it, and we was fortunate enough to be in the mix to get it. And that kind of finalized along the way, and of course Higginsville was still rumbling, and here again the friendship with Senator Matheson paid off, because he was then in a position in the Senate to get the land transferred through the legal process, and the Attorney General and everybody else had to transfer that land that we now have at Higginsville to a cemetery. So Higginsville was in the boiling pot for probably at least 5 years before we really got it finalized. And, but it was from the Higginsville interest in the beginning that the cemetery ended up in Higginsville. And the fact that the land was available, and the Parks Department wanted some of it up on the corner. And Senator Madison called me one day and said, "Did you agree with the Parks Department or whatever about it?" I said, "No, we need that little bit of strip of land up there by the driveway that goes into the Confederate cemetery. They wanted some of that land for some crazy reason." I said, "No, I haven't agreed to that at all." Back then, as I look at it, I apparently had a little more influence than I thought that I realized I had, because there was no organized like Mavo is today, and they need to do a better job. But that's another subject. There was no organized. I was the one in the halls that was recognized as the veteran representative. So they good or bad, they'd call me about a subject, I said. So Senator Madison, no, I said we need that land as well, that fits the pattern. So he made sure we got it. But Higginsville was an interesting project because of the nature of it, beginning with the groundswell of the Higginsville citizenry, and the fact that this one individual had left a small amount of money that wasn't properly dedicated and was spent, and that they thought they were maybe cheated or whatever. I don't know what they thought, but but anyway, so then Higginsville and Springfield went together about the same time. Just delayed Higginsville, and then Springfield. I had 3 or 4 guys down there that every once in a while they'd show up at the Capitol talking about the cemetery in Springfield, and I'd spend the next day squaring away what the misinformation he'd given. That always happens to you too. So anyway.
Well, the commission, we know, has 3 core programs: our homes, cemeteries, and our veteran services program. Do you see changes in our mission in the future?
The three basic programs, which we didn't have 25 years ago. We just had service officer, and it's much stronger today. There's going to be some change. What that might be in the long range. I think our basic mission is going to pretty well remain the same: service to veterans, and that service to veterans may change with technology and things that I haven't even thought about today. But I see the need for a long range just because of the nature of the various wars we've been in along the way of the home system, certainly. Cemetery, and we need to be of service to the veterans, and that service will probably change just because of technology. But beyond that, other than helping veterans, I don't see a mission changing very much. The basic mission, how we accomplish that will change. Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on what the role of the commission should be?
Roles of the commission. Well, yeah, my own thoughts. I guess it relates to when I was actually on the commission, but I think the commission, to me, needs to be more than just meeting quarterly. It needs to be visible, not in the legislature every day like I was necessarily, but they need to be seen, and legislators need to know who they are, and they need to really do more to support the overall mission of the commission, as far as I'm concerned. Unfortunately, some of the appointees through the years have been appointees for the recognition and not necessarily available for whatever reason to really support veterans' activities. I mean, I've been through the years disappointed, and of course from the very beginning I was opposed to the legislators being appointed to the commission because I felt 5 was sufficient if they were doing their job, and of course it took the legislature 2 years to finally appoint representatives, but I know some veterans think that they would be beneficial, but I haven't seen it, and from day one I was opposed to it, period. I mean, I just felt that the 5 was sufficient if they were doing their job and if they were true active veterans, which in many cases they're not. They're various reasons recommended by some veterans group, but just because they're a good guy and somebody else wants them, or whatever the story may be, and they haven't been like the beginning commission. There were 3 out of the 5 that was working in the trenches of veterans groups, and that's what it's going to take for the commission itself to be more effective than it is today.
As the veteran population decreases, how do you think that you can keep the legislators engaged and continue making veterans a priority? How can we do that?
Well, it's full participation. I mean, it gets back to the commission. MAVO is not as strong as it should be, in my opinion. They talk unification of being one, of representing the veterans, but yet they tend to represent different things in the halls, and the veterans groups themselves are going to have to be solid, because as long as they're divided in any fashion, you've lost your votes right there. It just kind of, as the veterans population decreases, of course now we have very few veterans in the legislature. They don't understand veterans problems at all, and that makes it tougher. So you've got to have you got to be visible, and the commission themselves have to be active veterans people to show up in the legislature once a week or on various occasions, not just somebody out here that's a member of the commission and you never see them.
What's your opinion on building a new veterans home?
What's my opinion on what?
Building a new veterans home?
Building a new veterans home. There's various factors involved that I don't understand all of them, and I'm sure most veterans don't. But there is a cost factor involved. And as I understand it, our basic quota as far as VA is concerned, so some of the VA assistance is not going to be there on a new veterans homes. Number one, if we could figure out the financing, and the legislature would agree to whatever that is, I favor another veterans home. I do. I was happy that the commission finally made a move to change Mexico. That was my first choice to start with. I dreamed of building a new 200 bed facility, and then rehabbing the one we have to maybe more of a domiciliary type unit, which would be something down the road to be more of a domiciliary type. But of course, that's an old equipment. It probably costs more to rehab it than to tear it down. So I favor that move definitely over any other move. But I've commented a time or two that if I was on the commission, which I'm not, the minute they start roaming about new veterans homes, I would look at the map again. And of course, we know 1/3 of our population is in the greater St. Louis area. And you can pick any town, Washington, Missouri, for example. I'd be coming up to the commission saying, hey, I got 25 acres here, let's build a home to start with. That's not happening. So yes, I favor under certain conditions new veterans homes, but I currently like the position of getting Mexico corrected first.
There has been in the past some talk about the commission, a move to move them under the Adjutant General. There's been some scuttle about that. What are your thoughts about the commission if they would do that?
I'm opposed to it. Simple. We would be, what term do I want to use? We would be degrading, for lack of another term, the commission. We'd be stepping down instead of improving. We'd be stepping down from what we've accomplished, which means we've got more to do, naturally. But it was tough enough getting a standalone commission away from the other system we had, which was not working necessarily, going back to another layer of government.
You've mentioned MAVO
Yes.
previously. What is the history of MAVO and its members, and what do you think it needs to be doing in the future?
The history of MAVO started at the same time we got the commission going, and it involved really the organization of the commission. That the veterans groups wanted a veteran, and whoever that might be, wanted certainly someone that was active in veterans activities to be the chairman. And of course they had rumblings that might not happen, and they didn't want the governor influence of appointing the chairman, because that was going to be the prerogative of the commission. So they got really organized at the same time as a veterans groups, and then from there on, their mission should be solidarity of the veterans' efforts in the legislature. Each group's got their own programs. That's something different, but they need to be more solid legislative-wise to keep the veterans active before the General Assembly. So MAVO needs to be stronger than they are. They sometimes forget that, sometimes even back in history we had a commissioner that was always more involved with the VA than he was with the commission, but they sometimes get to talking about federal legislation, which is a different issue completely, instead of just staying with the state issues and getting solid against activities in the state, where nationally they have a tendency to disagree more, and they get concentrating on that, and they really need to kind of regroup and look at their own organization as to what their real purpose is. Actually, they're not because they could be much stronger than they are if they just devote to state activities, and instead of getting off in fringe areas and talking about federal legislation. And that wasn't what MAVO was organized to start with for. It's the Missouri Association of Veterans Organizations. It's not national.
You currently serve as the president of the MVC Foundation, Inc.
Correct.
That was organized. Who do you feel should serve as foundation members?
Well, the foundation is set up to have 5 board members. And who should serve on that would be what I consider to be active veterans, ones that's active in their own veterans groups. And I've thought a time or two it might even be wise to have, nothing would restrict it from having a non-veteran on there if it was somebody that was really devoted to helping veterans. I personally wouldn't oppose to that, but the foundation needs to have individuals that's strictly interested in Missouri veterans and have some way participated, been active through the years, type thing.
What should the foundation be doing, do you believe?
The foundation is merely there to assist the commission and to do things that that are necessary to improve the staff working and areas that the state budget won't permit. It's there merely to assist the commission and veterans activities.
Larry K. calls you the godfather of the commission.
I don't know about that, but
Who are the Jim Whitfields in the future?
ooh,
And where do we find them?
that's a $64 question. I don't see one on the horizon. And somewhere, somebody's got to show up to do it, or it won't get done. You know, you just got to grab it and go, which I did. Yeah.
Any ideas where we would find another you?
Well, I hate to make that comparison to myself, but I don't know. Just have to be truly dedicated to the cause. And I see some out there that talk a pretty good game and maybe do it about halfway, but they're not ready to vote full time, so to speak. Because it does take extra time. I mean, if you're working for a living and you know, go take extra trips to Jeff City and some night phone calls and various other things you got to do to make some of those things happen. Mm-hmm. Or like one time I went to St. Joe in a rainstorm to convince them they weren't going to get a veterans home. I mean, you got to make those decisions as well. I met with 75 people in St. Joe to tell them they're not going to get a veterans home.
How do you want to be remembered?
A veterans advocate and someone that gave back.
Just what you've done. Do you have any thoughts on, and Daniel help me out with this, on Larry mentioned about privatizing, what are your thoughts on the VA privatizing?
Privatizing?
Yeah, let's talk about the VA being privatized.
Yeah. What?
100% opposed. Because when you privatize, they're in business to make money, and the level of service would be decreased accordingly. And I also think that in the privatization, especially the homes, we'd lose all the volunteers. Be no incentive for them to, other than their dedication to an individual veteran or something of that nature. So you lose the volunteers. The level of service would decrease accordingly to the bottom line. I'm just opposed to it, period.
Is there anything you'd like to share with us that you'd like to talk about today?
Oh, I don't know.
I don't have any more questions.
One I think we missed that I know I talked to you about this in the past, and I'd just like to hear it again. How exactly did the commission seal come into being?
What was that?
Commission logo?
Yeah.
How was that created? And all the little parts of it, because I remember you saying those 15 stars don't mean anything.
No. The logo and the flag somewhere along the way, I accused Bill Haynes of this, who was deputy director at the time, came up with a pen, and it had a 17 stars or something on it. So I asked him one day how he arrived at it. Why didn't he have 21 to represent the state of Missouri? He didn't know. So that the history of that, I'm not sure how it developed. Other than he didn't know either. Here's a pen. It's got our eagles and the 17 stars, and so that was that. So other than how that got created, I'm not sure, because Bill Haynes didn't know, and he's the one that showed me the pen. So anyway, then we in the very beginning, of course, I spent more than a year or two trying to get a war memorial in Jeff City. And so that materialized during the very early stages of the commission, where it finally got settled. Because the final deal was some kind of a state committee, and I'm not sure what it's called, but it's the governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general makes the final decision on some things. Well, there was a 2-to-1 vote as to where it was going to be located. Here again, Mathewson stepped in and got it solved, and I had one location which did develop. Carnahan, lieutenant governor, wanted to put it down some space that had been lost down by the parking lot there by the state building. Well, that wasn't going to work. So we got that accomplished. But then I get a phone call, because we're moving up towards dedication of the memorial and putting that program together. I get a phone call and they say, we got 3 flag poles. What flag's going on the 3rd pole? I said, the commission flag. They said, we don't have a commission flag. I said, you'll have one by dedication. So I happened, because working at the Legion, I knew the president of Annan Company, the largest flag maker in the country. I called him, I said, I need a flag. Yeah. I need a flag. He said, well, what kind of flag? I said, well, it's not going to be complicated, because here's the emblem. It doesn't stand for anything other than the commission. Put it on a blue field. So that's how come we got the flag we fly. That's how come the flag happened. Because they called me and wanted to know what we were going to put on the 3rd pole. I said, the commission flag. He said, we don't have one. I said, well, we don't have one but dedication. So you build up relationships through the years, so I can make a phone call and get a flag. Yeah.
Did you have anything else?
Yeah. But we got that dedication, because we wise in getting that dedicated to all wars instead of trying to designate one or the other. So, all of a sudden, I don't know, somewhere in history, something come about memorial or something, and I discovered we didn't have a war memorial in Jeff City. So, anyway, we got one finally. So we dedicated to all wars, past and present and future. So. But that turned out to be a pretty nice ceremony. Turned out to be.
It's a pretty memorial. Too.
Yeah. I haven't been by it recently, so I don't know what condition they're maintaining it in, but.
And that's through the parks.
Yeah. Long range, I always dreamed of the Confederate soldiers' home being, the soldiers' cemetery being under the commission. Those parks know about maintaining a cemetery. And I've been in it when it's been in pretty bad shape. Stones are not maintained.
I've been over there in a long time.
But it'd be, next to the Higginsville Cemetery, and there's already a line of trees that separate them. But there's a logical place that a road could connect the two together and be under one director. Of course, you got to have additional staff, but be maintained properly. So, but that's down the road. I mean, it may never happen, but I think it should happen. So, so I don't know what else you'll want to hear from me. Be things I think about later on, probably. But yeah, to think what 25 years ago, 27 years ago now, or something, from 1989 to the present. We've really come from nothing. Sure, we got 7 homes which we planned, but 2 of them have been completely rebuilt, Mount Vernon and St. James. They're new homes now. We're going to get Mexico new. And very, very few people even thought of a cemetery system 25 years ago, and now we've got 6 maintaining, cleaned up St. James, where it's a nice memorial type cemetery nowadays. And improved our service officer work tremendously. And of course, going computer-wise to tie into the VA system is a big move in the right direction. It makes it easier for them to be a service to the veteran. And yeah, our life history has been interesting and very good to me. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. So.
It's going to be great information.